Hi everyone, thanks for joining. My name's Sarah and I'm delighted to have you online with us today for our webinar, Email Filtering. I'm going to be introducing you to Carol and Manuele. Now, Manuele, otherwise known within the industry as Skull, he's been working with email infrastructure and particularly the security aspect of email for many years. And meanwhile, Carol, his focus within the team is very much around data, any and all data, in fact, anything that helps provide context and ultimately protection. Now, just before I hand over to Skull and Carol, I'd like to mention that we will be having a Q&A session at the end of this webinar. So I've opened the Zoom Q&A window now. Feel free to put your questions in as and when they pop up in your mind. But we will be answering them at the end, not as and when they come up. And without a pause, I'll pass over to Carol.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, good day. Let's cover what we're going to talk about today. We'll focus on what the best stages are to use the various DNSPLs that we provide, how to use them in the context of the initial connection, what the benefits at that stage are, how to use them during the pre-data phase, and what the benefits are of using this data before doing any content filtering, and finally look at the post-data phase and how the various data sets can be applied there. We'll look at the most easiest way of applying the data to all the different parts of the email that you're going to receive and the different parts of the receiving process, using the available plugins that we make available. And then we'll have the Q&A session at the end. One thing to mention here is that we're talking about DNSBLs here. The data is also available through other means, but this time we focus purely on the way of using doing a DNS query to access the data to get the results. There's also the HTTP API available, but that is for a different use case. Although you could, wherever you can see DNSBL, you could also think of using an HTTP API at that same place if that is more preferable to you. So the stages to utilize DNSBLs. The earliest stage where one could use this data to get mail out of the way that you do not want is the initial connection. So you want, the moment the connection gets made, you know the IP address that's making the connection, and this provides you with a IP address you can look up against our data and get a result and make a decision based on that. Second stage is the pre-data phase. That's everything that's happened after the initial connection, but before the moment the data command gets issued in the SDP conversation. And so there's a couple of things happening there that allow you to consult some of our data sets and make decisions based on that. And then finally, there's the post-data phase where by now you have had the data command that you received the entire email, and that presents you with another couple of good data points and sort of anchors to use the data we publish for, and make decision based on that. And yeah, so let's start at the initial connection part.
Indeed. Hi, everyone. So yes, data connection. This is where everything begins. At this point, you receive the initial SMTP connection from the sender. You don't know anything about who is going to be the recipient for that email, assuming it's going to result in an email. You don't know anything about who is the sender, but you know something about the sending IP. And that is where you can actually pick up that very information. That is the originating IP for the SMTP session. Look it up against our data sets, and that already tells you something about that IP. I mean, the connection may be coming from a known offender. either an SPL listing or a drop listing. It can be coming from, for example, end user IP space where no email server is supposed to be. It may be coming from an IP known for hosting an exploited machine, like malware, Trojans, and similar threats. And that already provides you a bit of information that you can start with. Now, of course, it should be clear that at this point, the information you have is very minimal. You just know the IP. But there are some things that you can already decide to do at this stage, particularly if you are forced to do it. And a good example of that is drop. Drop contains only hijacked networks and very, very bad networks, the worst of the worst, like bulletproof hosting or similar stuff. Really nothing good to come from. So what you can do at this stage is, for example, decide to already refuse connections coming from this IP space. Another thing that is actually happening at this very stage is the fact that given that you have the IP, you can perform a reverse DNS lookup for it and see what hostname it has associated with it, if any. How we're going to use that, we'll see in the later stage, just because it's more comfortable to do that. But this is the stage where you actually do perform that reverse DNS check.
Okay, so that sort of covers the first phase where all you have is the initial connection, and as a result, all you have is this IP address that connected to you and tries to deliver mail. What are the benefits of using data at this point? Well, to get rid of the worst, there's just a general reduction in resources. You load the number of connections that are open to your mail servers, and it's really sort of a tool to deal with the worst cases of abuse, where you can say, just based on the IP alone, I do not want any mail from here, no matter what it would be, because the assumption is that it's just never going to be anything good. It's reasonable to think of it as sort of a dynamic SSB firewall. Usually people think in the context of a firewall is, you put an IP in there, you forget about it. So, but this basically is the firewall that keeps itself up to date with a set of IP addresses where you can say, okay, here I do not want to receive any mail from, and it allows you to very efficiently get rid of the worst of the worst. However, be careful, because if you drop things by looking just at an IP, you are sort of denying yourself a whole bunch of information that could be useful for other cases. So there is, there's a limit in the amount of logging information that you'll receive this way. Okay, so let's go to the second stage, and that is during using the data to make decisions during the pre-data phase. This covers everything after the connection's been made and before the data command is issued in the SSB transaction.
Yes, as we left off in the previous stage, we're still at the end of the connection phase. At this point, we know the IP, we know it's a reverse DNS. So the very first thing that we can do with that is look it up against DBL and ZRD. Both DBL and ZRD are domain-based information bases. Meaning that you can query them using a domain or a host name as the key, and they will return what they know about it. And what they know about it is, in the case of DBL, whether that domain or host name is known to be associated with some nefarious activity. And even that already provides you some granularity. I mean, the nefarious activity may be related with the domain being, well, the host name or the domain being abused, in which case you want to be quite lenient on what you do with the connection at this stage. But it may be because the domain is known to be a bad domain. a domain controlled by bad people or observed trying to do bad things. So that can even bring to a short circuit in spam assassin terms. That is, already make a decision at this very stage with ignoring any additional data that may be coming in. Of course, doing that is up to you. ZRD, on the other hand, is going to provide you information about whether the domain in use is very, very new. And the reason for that is that very new domains that have never been seen around yet and start doing something, well, more often than not, these domains are going to be used for, well, again, nefarious activities. Of course, this is not a silver bullet. It is not necessarily meaning that the domain is 100% bad, but it can provide you with some additional intel about the connection, meaning that you can use that in your scoring system to as a component to the decision that you're going to make later. Now, at this stage, the next thing that is going to happen is that the source is going to send us the hello comment. The hello comment comes with a string that is supposed by RFC to be the host name of the sending machine. And being that a host name, we can therefore perform exactly the same type of query that we did against the reverse DNS of the sending IP. So again, we can check it against the DBL with the same considerations applying. We can check it against the ZRD, again, with the same considerations applying. Like before, you can decide or not to make any result, any positive result that you get from here, your final stance on the message, or you can just use that to accumulate a score and move forward in the SMTP transaction. And that's exactly what we suggest to do in any case, because at the next stage, we have the mail from command that is where you are actually informed of who the sender of this message is. That is, if you perform any activity before this stage, you don't even know the sender. And that goes back to what Carol was saying before about your ability to debug something when some sender tells you that they are not able to mail any of your users or your customers. Well, if you don't reach this stage, you don't have the information about who the sender of the message is. So you want to reach at least this stage and possibly the next one too, and we'll see why in a second. Now, what we do at this stage is that we do have an email address that is the sender address. We can check the domain for that address, again, against DBL and ZRD. But being that an email address, we can also check it against the HBL, or better said, we can check its hash against the HBL. We'll go through HBL in a second, but a short version is that the HBL is a container for hashes in various contexts. Email addresses is one of the contexts that is available. Since you have at this point an email address that is related with whoever is sending you stuff, you want to check that against the HBL. Now, for all the host names that were cited so far, host name or domain names, there is something additional that you can do if you want to. That is, try to perform a forward DNS resolution. That is, given the IP or the host name, try to see which IP or IPs is that it does resolve to. If you do that, you're going to come up with an IP, and that IP can be used to further query our data. In particular, we suggest doing so against the SPL. That is something that you can use. The outcome of that is an information that you can use, particularly in scoring systems. If you feel like, just do that. And finally, at this stage, the next command that you are going to receive is the RCPT2. RCPT2 is actually going to be more than one command in case the recipient, in case the message comes in for multiple recipients. You're going to receive one RCPT2 for each recipient. You're getting no new data from the RCPT2, because in the end, it's just telling you where the message is trying to go to. It's a user, in theory. It's a user locally to your system, so it's not like it can add anything particular in terms of reputation for this message. However, at this stage, you have all the informations in place for proper logging. You know who the sender is, who the intended recipient is, in addition to where the message is coming from. And that is why, in our opinion, whether or not you already made your decision in the previous stage, this is where you should actually apply the rejection of the message if you decide to do so. Because only at this stage you have all the information, all the proper information in your logs in order to debug events that are happening. You can also decide to reject for some recipients only, meaning that if the recipients of this message are 3 and one is excluded from filtering. For example, think of your abuse address or any address that is supposed to be unfiltered. What you can still do is reject the message for all the recipients except the one that you want to be able to receive it. And what will happen is that the other 2 recipients will just not go through. The sender, if it is an actual sender, will receive a bounce message, a non-delivery notification message, informing them that the 2 addresses were not able to receive their message, but the email will still go through and reach the addresses that have been excluded from filtering. So apply, that is our suggestion, apply your rejection policies, if any, of course, at this stage, as this gives you the ability to both debug things properly and apply differentiated filtering mechanisms for different recipients.
So let's recap what the benefits are. It's somewhat similar to what the first one is. However, you do have a little bit more information now available to work with and to debug if things go wrong. Because we now know what the intended recipient of the message was, there's the ability to exclude certain recipients from filtering in cases where that might be beneficial. There's the consideration of the more general protection of your infrastructure against spam campaigns. There are cases where you will get a lot of emails in a very short amount of time, which might overload the messaging systems that you have, and in case where there's a lot of content to be worked with, that's obviously the most resource intensive phase of the whole process. This is a way, by dealing with the majority of the mail pre-data phase, it's a good way to reduce the load on the content scanners available. So the more you can get rid of before reaching that stage, the better it is in terms of resource usage. Obviously, this is not something that will happen to everyone, and you may only get a few messages. But the larger your email infrastructure is, the bigger this effect will be, where you will see spam campaigns basically targeting all of your users coming in a very short amount of time, sometimes just minutes, where the whole campaign just lasts a couple of minutes and then is gone. But there's a just enormous peak usage that you will see. If the sender address is forged, there is the chance that third-party infrastructures might be flooded with return messages. That will not happen if you do things right. And then by using the domain block list as well as the IP block list, there's a good increase in protection against certain types of spam campaigns where we know that there's a lot more of IP rotation going on than for some other cases where and applying the domains block list there is a good way of adding an extra layer of protection. One thing to remember there is that we are often able to put domains in our domain data sets before they're actually being used in the actual spam campaign. So having that layer in there allows you to be prepared for the stuff you haven't seen yet, and sometimes we even haven't seen yet. But by knowing the domains are bad in advance, you can have that extra layer of protection already be available to you. So having said that, let's go on to the post data phase.
Yes, as a matter of fact, if we were to compare to the traditional postal service, so far we did everything just by looking at the envelope of the mails going through. We didn't really see the mail themselves. So this is what is going to happen next. At this stage, we receive the data command. And in return to the data command, we are starting to receive all the headers and all the content of the message. And there are quite a few hooks inside the message itself and inside its headers that can be used in order to make filter efficient. The very first thing is all the previous IPs, previous hosts that the message went through before reaching us, assuming it was actually relayed through multiple steps. That can be interesting because some abuse sources will appear in the received headers, meaning that the message was originating on those networks. And two main types of abusive sources can be identified here. The first one is, in general, SPL listings, when the IP is known to be related with malicious content or, in any case, unwanted content. And the second part is actually our OauthBL. OauthBL is a subset of our exploited block list, that is Trojans and otherwise compromised machines. But it's the subset that is known to perform, well, abusive authenticated SMTP session, meaning that these are bots that are known to connect to valid mail server through valid credentials that they've stolen from users, and use those credentials to actually pump out spam through an otherwise legit mail server. In that case, what is going to happen is that, of course, we're not going to list the mail server unless the situation is particularly bad. But the originating point, the injection point, the compromised machine that is performing the activity will most likely end up listed by the OauthBL. So checking the received IPs against both the SPL and the OauthBL can provide you additional context about whether or not the message is abusive in nature. The next thing that you're going to receive is, of course, all the rest of the headers. Let's start from the reply to address, because this is something that is common to a lot of, for example, 419 type of spam. 419 being the so-called Nigerian prince scam, where you're actually being contacted about this huge, humongous amount of money that is just waiting for you to grab. What happens in those messages is that the spammer will actually include a contact address inside the reply to address. And while the sending email address is going to change from spam to spam because it's often forged, or it is actually a compromised account owned by somebody else, so they rotate through them. while sending all the same spam, well, the reply to is going to be fairly static. You can observe the same reply to address in connection with many, often thousands of different sending IPs, sending email addresses, and so on. So that is a very useful hook to attach a reputation on. And of course, that can be checked against the HPL. It's actually one of the main purposes of the email component of the HPL. Just pick up that email address, normalize it, hash it, and then check the hash against the HPL, and that will tell you whether we know that that address was observed as associated with these activities. Of course, just like with anything else that contains a domain name, this email address also contains a domain name. So what you can do is also check that very domain name against the DBL. Because as a matter of fact, some of these activities, some of these spammers do register their own domain only for the purpose of using them, it inside the reply to address. So doing that query can also provide you additional information. And of course, this same approach also extends to the sender address. That is either the sender header and or the from header. Those are, again, email addresses. So again, you can check them against the HPL and the DBL as well. Next in stage is any URL you can find in the body. This is links to websites or website forms or whatever they are, some page somewhere. And if the campaign is known to be associated with some spam activity, it may very well be that that URL points to a hostname or a domain that is already listed by the DBL. So again, pick up all the host names contained in those URLs and check them against the DBL and or ZRT for additional context. And the same should also be applied to all the email addresses that you may find in the body. Again, if we go back to the 419 case above, but also with many other scams that are going on, not only you can find contact addresses in the reply to, you can also find contact addresses inside the email body. So if you do extract the email addresses from the body and check them against the HPL, that again is going to provide you additional information. Next stage, check if the content of if the body of the message contains any crypto wallet addresses. You've certainly seen so-called attempts to extort money from recipients of messages by telling them that their computer is compromised and that some private information about them is now in the hands of bad people that are going to release that and so on. So pay me money with this crypto wallet address. This is more often Bitcoin addresses, but we have seen other crypto currencies in use as well. If you can extract those, that is again something that you can hash and query and check against the HPL. The HPL has a component that is dedicated to this. And as a matter of fact, this is extremely effective because these emails are often, not always, but are often coming from bots that abuse valid credentials from infected users and inject these messages inside the queue of legit mail servers. meaning that unless the sending IP is actually listed by the OAuth and that information is available in the received headers, the crypto wallet address is one of the very few informations that you can extract from the message, except of course for the content, the text that is inside the message that can be used for that as well. Actually, again, with the email addresses for 419 and other type of scams, this was one of the main reasons why we decided to deploy the HPL as an approach. Last but not least, if the email contains any attachment, well, those attachments can also be hashed and queried against the HPL. Just like with the other two cases, the HPL contains one context, as we call it, one container for bad attachments that are being spamvertised. This includes, but is not limited to, any malicious attachment that may come with the email, such as spam advertising that is trying to force the user into running some, say, Office file that contains macro, and that macro is then going to try infecting the system. Those messages we try to collect, and we do put them in the HPL. This type of approach should never be intended to replace any antivirus scanning or activity that you perform against your traffic. It's just an add-on, so to say. It's something that you can do, and in our opinion, you should do, because we are, given our infrastructure, we are able to identify these attachments fairly quickly, and we can list them very, very quickly. And by very, very quickly, I mean just a handful of seconds. And this is often way faster than any antivirus company can deploy signatures on. Of course, signatures by antivirus are completely different in nature. Meaning that they don't necessarily try to target that very attachment alone, that very file alone. They try to identify the entire family that attachment belongs to. So it is not to be said that your antivirus is not going to catch it just because the attachment has never seen before. But since you can do this against our data, we do suggest that you do it, just because it is additional protection, and everything in this regard helps when it's up to defend our users. Some of the matches above can be used as, again, in spam assassin terms, short circuit rules, meaning that just because one of the hits is returning the proper code, that means that we can even decide that we just don't want the message per se. Or you may decide to use that information just for scoring and build up your score throughout all the information you have for the message. Maybe with the addition, actually, probably with the addition of any other content scanner that you are running on your systems that may be related with text analysis and machine learning and whatever you may want to put into the thing. And you're, in that case, what you probably want to do is just apply proper scores to the previous matches that we just said, and just use them in addition to anything else that you're running in your system to come out with a decision. Now, whatever at the end of this stage, it must be noted, as you can see in the graph on the left, that the connection with the sender is still open. The TCP session is still up, and that means that you have two scenarios that you can apply here. The first one is that you make your decision while the connection is still open. If that happens, what you can do, but again, it's up to you, is decide to entirely reject the message, meaning that the message will never enter your mail system, really. It will never be delivered to your users. What will happen is that the sending system will receive a delivery error and will, if the message is actually coming from a real mail server that is sending for real people, that mail server will take care of informing the sender about the fact that that message didn't go anywhere. The other chance that you have, particularly if performing all this analysis while the connection is still open, is too heavy of a process for you, because of course that means that you are going to keep the connection open for a longer time, and therefore it's going to increase the concurrency of your connections. In that case, you can decide to perform the analysis after you close the connection. But in that case, you can no longer reject the message. Delivering the message to the spam folder of the intended recipient is more or less your only option.
So let's go on to the benefits of using the DNSPLs during the post data phase as described. There's quite an increase in catch rates. We often come across people who think that the use case of DNSPLs is only at the early stage and you can only query IPs and nothing else. Well, as you've seen, there are many other things you can use to basically attach a reputation to, but you will need to have the entire content of the email to do that and to find out these elements and to do the queries to figure out what you want to do with the email. So there's the attachments, there's the email addresses, any URLs, domains found in the emails, obviously crypto wallets, and who knows what else. There's this is not a static list. You know, if there's the need to add more things to that, we will do that. It's probably good to point out at this point that it's really best, you know, as Cole was mentioning about keeping connections open or closing them, to reject an email whenever you have the chance to do that, and you're comfortable with the decision to do that. The reason why is that there's a really good opportunity for debugging there, not just on your side, but on the receiving side. When you reject a message during the session, there will be a delivery status notification generated, and in real time, which will be returned to the sender explaining why the message was not accepted, and that is a great way of debugging in case things go wrong. But to me, more important reason of doing this is that even though you might decide that something is a bad email that you don't want, storing them in a junk folder is really not the best solution. You're still spending all the cost of storage of these bad emails, which, if you run a large system with many users, can go up by quite a bit. But you're basically flooding the junk folder, which is sort of meant as a last resort. It's often said that if you don't get our email, you check the junk folder, which is a good thing to do, unless this junk folder is flooded with thousands and thousands of other mails that are generally just incredibly bad and should have been rejected in the first place. The junk folder is the place for the cases where you're not 100% sure. The more sure you are, the better it is to just reject the messages at all and just get rid of them as soon as you can. However, there's one important thing to mention in case of rejecting messages, is that you should never do this when you've already closed the connection, because at that point you will generate a sort of an out of the loop bounce, which will go to whatever the forged address is in the spam, and that is usually not the actual sender, and that's usually just some address that forged from somewhere, and some innocent bystander will get that rejection message, and that's just not the right way to do it. So having gone through all of this, there's a lot of stuff you can check. There's a lot of different ways you can apply the data that we publish to get really good results. And you might think, say, wow, that's a lot of stuff to apply and to write the code and the rules for. Well, you don't really have to. We've done that for you. We publish what we call our official plugins for Spam Assistant for RSPMD that do all this work for you, where we apply the right data at the right time to get the best results possible with our data. These are basically the reference implementations for how we see our data to be used. And while they're not meant to be a final and complete solution to email filtering, they're doing pretty good. And as seen in the independent testing done by Virus Bulletin, this is the last one they've published. We reached a pretty good score here for just using the DNSPLs alone, but this does mean to get to these sort of catch rates, you do need to do more than just look at the IP address that's connected to you and verifying that against others. You really do need to take the deeper dive and to look up domains and email addresses and etc., and utilize the full spectrum of the data that we publish to get to these sort of results. Scroll on to you.
As a matter of fact, let me point out that, to be specific, the testing operated by Virus Bulletin is actually performed against the spam assassin implementation. That is not to say that the RSPMD is any worse. It's just that is what we have been tested. Let me add a little bit of information about this. Both spam assassin, so this is not necessarily in contrast with everything we said so far, but keep in mind that any advanced spam filtering system, RSPMD in particular in this case over here, comes with self-learning capabilities, meaning that they can start learning from the scoring of the messages that get into your system. What are the characteristics of the bad messages, and learn from that. And that information can turn out to be useful when the message is coming from an unknown source that maybe has just popped out and didn't make it into our lists yet, but it shares the same characteristics and as many other messages that were already identified by us and are being filtered by us. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that if you apply our data at the MTA level directly, instead of using the primitives, the functionalities allowed by, in this case, RSPMD, or in general by any of these filtering platform, filtering tool sets, well, you're basically depriving the tool itself from this learning capacity because bad messages are not reaching them because you are dropping them before they can reach them. Of course, that doesn't mean that you cannot do it, particularly in case of emergency, like in the SMTP firewall thing that we discussed earlier. If you are into defense mode because your systems are being overwhelmed by traffic, it is of course perfectly okay to do so. But in the normal scenario, if you're using these advanced frameworks for filtering, then you want to put as much of the logic as you can inside them, as opposed to perform things outside of them. And yeah, that's just a small detail that you may be aware of. In the end, it's about knowing your tools. But since many have been falling into that pitfall in the past, I think it's worth pointing that out. And I think we're more or less at the end of our presentation.
I think so, yeah. I think we should go on to the questions, Sarah.
We don't have Sarah around, it seems. Well, let's just pick up some of the questions that came in. Meanwhile, I have one from Kumar. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Would you be sharing the recording of this meeting at the end of the session? As a matter of fact, yes, this is going to go in our YouTube channel in the first place. But in any case, all those who registered for attendance will receive a direct link with a pointer to the complete video and the presentation. So that's a yes.
Fantastic. Thanks, Skull. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent. My apologies. My headset suddenly stopped working. So there is just another couple of questions. Thank you, Skull, for picking up Kumar's question. Yes, we definitely do share recordings. But the next question is DNSBL the only way you can use this data?
I'll take that one. It is not. So we also publish the same data that we publish in the DNSBL format, which means what you're basically doing to ask the question is a DNS lookup, and the answer of that DNS lookup will be the answer to that question. We also publish an HTTP API where basically you ask the same question, and you get it back in the HTTP query just as a regular JSON RESTful API query. So that is an alternative to this in cases where you might want to do that for whatever the reasons for doing that are. So it's definitely not just the DNSBL only.
Okay, thanks, Carol. And then the last one from Corey Luke. Do you have any other advice for preventing backscatter emails other than rejecting at the time of SMTP conversion, at the time of the SMTP conversation?
I'll pick this one. It depends on what you are trying to defend from. The first thing is, of course, preventing backscatter to going out of your systems. And in that case, I'm afraid that not generating any bounce is basically the only way. That is to say, if you are not rejecting during the SMTP conversation, that you should really deliver that message to the spam folder if that is how your systems are set up. Of course, I'm saying spam folder, but any form of tagging, quarantine, or any variation of that is exactly the same to me. If, on the other hand, what you are trying to defend from is backscatter reaching your users because they have been forced, well, the solution to that is not as easy. The very first thing that you can do, there are some implementations out there that allow that, is to sign your outgoing messages in some way so that when a bounce comes in, a bounce, when done properly at least, is supposed to also include all the headers of the message generating the bounce. So if you apply a signature to the outgoing messages, you can check that the bounce that is reaching you is actually referring to a message that was signed by you. And in that way, you can identify whether the bounce is for something that actually was sent by your systems or not. And in case of not, it is most likely going to be just backscatter, indeed, caused by something else faking one of your users and therefore generating bounces going back at you. This is not necessarily extremely easy to do, but there are ways to do it. just search around for technologies in this field. I mean, solutions are not particularly fancy, but they have been around for a decade or so, so they shouldn't be particularly hard to find.
Thanks for that. I hope that helped, Corey. One last question, which has just come in via the chat. At the beginning, you talked about rejecting based on drop data, but how do you access this data as a DNSBL?
Yeah, that's a valid question, because as a matter of fact, for those of you who just don't know this, the drop data are actually just a subset of SBL. They're not published as an independent list. So there are two ways. The first one is that you can, of course, download the drop files from our website. They're out there in the open for anyone to pick them up and consume them locally. Of course, that is suboptimal, because it means that you are supposed to run your own DNSBL infrastructure or consume the data through something that is not a DNSBL. However, if you are a user of our DQS platform, if you do perform a query against Zen or against SBL for an IP that is listed by drop, you're going to receive, in addition to the return code associated with SBL, you're also going to receive a return code associated with drop, and specifically with drop, if the IP is, of course, also listed by drop in addition of SBL. So you can discriminate whether it is a simple SBL listing or whether it is a drop listing too, if you are a DQS user. And that, of course, is available to free users of the DQS as well.
Excellent. That's great. And that brings us to the end. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Skull. And we'll get the recording out to you all. And I also believe there's an ebook covering everything we've gone through, which we'll send to all of our attendees. So thanks very much for joining us. Enjoy what's left of your day, and hopefully we'll connect soon. Thank you all. Bye.